I am 79 years old, and I have learned very late that silence is sometimes the only thing that still belongs to you. Not the kind of silence people praise, not peace, just the decision not to answer anymore. There are questions I used to answer without thinking. I thought that's what you do when someone asks you something. You respond, you explain, you justify. It took me most of my life to understand that not every question deserves an answer. And by the time I understood that, most of the damage was already done. At this age, you begin to notice how little is left that can be changed. Not in a dramatic way. It's quieter than that. You just start seeing the edges of things, the end of conversations, the end of habits, the end of people. You realize there are no new beginnings waiting in the distance, just a narrowing. And in that narrowing, something becomes very clear. You begin to protect what little remains. Your time, your energy, your peace, if you can still call it that. When I was younger, I didn't think like this at all. In my 30s, I believed in being available. I believed in being reasonable. I believed that if someone asked me something, I owed them an answer. Why didn't you call? Why are you late? Why don't you visit more? Why can't you do this one thing? I answered all of it. Every question felt like a small obligation, nothing serious, just part of being a decent person. I had a job that demanded most of my time. Not a special job, just something steady. Papers, numbers, meetings that lasted longer than they needed to. I used to leave the house early, before the sun had fully settled into the day. My wife would already be in the kitchen, quiet, moving carefully so she wouldn't wake the children. We didn't talk much in the mornings. There was always the sense that we'd talk later. There's always later when you're younger. I would come home tired, not exhausted, just drained in a way that made conversation feel like effort. She would ask simple things. How was your day? And I would answer, but not really. I would give her the version that ended the question quickly, not the one that opened anything. That's how it starts, I think. Not with big neglect, just with small, efficient answers. Over time, the questions change. Why don't you sit with us? Why are you always working? Why do you look so far away? I still answered, I'm just tired. I have responsibilities. I'll make time this weekend. There was always a reason, always something that sounded reasonable. And for a while, it worked. Or maybe it didn't, but no one argued too much. Life kept moving. The children grew. Their voices changed. Their needs changed. At some point, they stopped asking as many questions. That should have meant something to me. But it didn't. Not then. I thought it meant things were easier now. I didn't understand that silence had already started. It's strange how much of life you miss while you're explaining yourself. You think you're being responsible. You think you're doing what's expected. You don't notice what's slipping away in the background. I remember one evening. Nothing important about it at the time. My daughter was sitting at the table, drawing something. I don't even remember what it was. She looked up and asked, "Can you stay tonight?" Such a simple question. And I answered the way I always did. I have work. She nodded, just nodded. No argument. No sadness on her face that I could see. That was it. I didn't know that was the last time she would ask me that. Not because something dramatic happened, just because she learned. Children learn very quickly where not to reach. Years passed like that. Work, home, occasional laughter, occasional tension, questions and answers. Always questions and answers. Why didn't you come to the school event? Why do you forget things I tell you? Why does everything else come first? I had answers for all of it. I was very good at answering. That's something I regret now. Not what I said, but that I always said something. There's a kind of trap in always responding. You keep the conversation going, but you don't actually hear it. You defend yourself instead of noticing what's being asked beneath the words. By the time I reached my 50s, things had changed in ways I didn't fully understand. The house was quieter. My son had moved out. My daughter was rarely home. My wife spoke less, not out of anger, just less. There were still questions, but they were different now. Do you remember when we used to? Why does it feel like we're strangers sometimes? Those were harder to answer, so I gave the same kind of answers I always had. We're just busy. Things change. It's normal. I said normal a lot in those years, as if naming something that way made it acceptable. I didn't notice that my answers were becoming shorter, more final. I thought I was simplifying things. What I was actually doing was closing them. The moment of irreversibility didn't arrive like I expected it would. There was no dramatic scene, no final argument. It came quietly. My wife got sick. At first, it didn't seem serious, just something that needed treatment, something manageable. We went to appointments, sat in waiting rooms, listened to doctors speak in careful tones. There were new questions then. Why didn't we notice earlier? Why didn't we take this seriously? Why did we wait? Those questions didn't come from her. They came from me. And for the first time in my life, I didn't have answers, not real ones. I tried to explain it to myself. Timing, circumstances, misunderstanding. But none of it felt true. What felt true was much simpler. We had been living side by side for years, and I had stopped paying attention. Not suddenly, not intentionally, just little by little, the way you stop noticing a sound that's always there. She didn't ask me many questions toward the end. That's something that stays with me. She used to ask so many, and then almost none. There was one night, I remember it clearly. She was lying in bed, awake, looking at the ceiling. I was sitting beside her, not saying much. She turned her head slightly and asked, "Were you happy?" That was the question. Not about work, not about time, not about anything practical. Just that. And I answered. I said something about providing for the family, about doing my best, about how life isn't always what you expect. I spoke for a while. I thought I was giving a thoughtful answer. When I finished, she just nodded. That same nod I had seen years ago from my daughter. No argument, no correction, just acceptance. I don't think she was asking for an explanation. I think she was asking for something I didn't know how to give. She passed away not long after that. And that question stayed, not the answer I gave. That feels empty now. Just the question. Were you happy? At 79, I can tell you this. There are questions that don't need answers in the moment. They need presence. And if you miss that, you don't get another chance. After she was gone, people asked me things. Are you okay? Do you need anything? Why didn't you tell us it was this serious? I answered less. Not out of wisdom at first, just fatigue. I didn't have the energy to explain anymore. And something unexpected happened. Nothing fell apart when I didn't answer. The world didn't stop. People didn't disappear. Some questions just faded on their own. That's when I started to understand. Not every question is a doorway. Some are just noise. At this age, you begin to recognize which is which. When someone asks, "Why didn't you do more?" what are they really asking? When they say, "Why are you alone?" what answer could possibly satisfy that? There are questions that try to pull you back into a version of yourself that no longer exists. A version that could fix things, change things. That version is gone. Answering those questions doesn't bring it back. It just drains what little you have left. I sit alone most evenings now, not in a sad way, just alone. The house is smaller than it used to feel. Or maybe I am. There are objects that haven't moved in years. A chair she used to sit in. A drawer with things she kept. I don't open it often. Not because I'm afraid, just because I know what's inside. Some things don't need to be revisited to be remembered. People still ask me things sometimes. Neighbors, distant relatives. Do you miss them? Do you regret anything? Why didn't you slow down when you had the chance? I choose carefully now. Sometimes I answer. Most times I don't. Not out of bitterness, just because the answer won't change anything. And I've come to see that not every truth needs to be spoken out loud. If you're listening to me now, I'm not telling you what to do. I don't think it works that way. I can only tell you what I see from here. There is a cost to always explaining yourself. There is a cost to answering every question as if it demands something from you. Sometimes the question itself is the problem. Sometimes it leads you away from what matters, instead of toward it. I spent years answering questions about time, about work, about responsibility. I rarely stopped to ask myself better ones, not out loud, just quietly. Am I here right now? Is this moment enough? Do I need to leave again? Those questions don't require long answers. They require something else, something I didn't give enough of. What is permanently lost is not dramatic. It's not a single event you can point to. It's a collection of small moments that were never fully lived. Conversations that ended too quickly. Questions that were answered instead of understood. Time that was always postponed. You don't feel it disappearing as it happens. You feel it much later, when there's nothing left to trade for it. I can't go back and sit at that table with my daughter. I can't answer my wife's question differently. Even if I had the perfect words now, they wouldn't reach her. That's the part people don't say clearly enough. You don't get to correct it later. There is no later for certain things. At 79, you stop trying to fix the past, not because you've made peace with it, but because there is no mechanism left to change it. There is only this chair, this evening, this quiet, and a smaller, quieter understanding. I don't answer every question anymore, not because I've become wiser in some grand way, just because I've learned what answering used to cost me. If I could go back, I don't think I would speak more. I think I would speak less, but stay more. There's a difference. It took me a lifetime to see it. Now there isn't much lifetime left to use it. That's how it goes, I suppose. You learn things at the exact moment they become less useful, and you carry them anyway, quietly, without answering when you don't need to.